Can everyone be seated, please? Is this on?
Yes, of course. Just speak loudly.
We'd like to start the program. If everyone could be seated, please.
Hey, everybody in the back, come on up front. We're going to be close together.
Right.
That means you, everybody.
Thank you very, very much for coming to this panel. Our team, Jim Rosapepe and Tom Malinowski and I, have been working very hard since April on a plan to mobilize and micro-target Central and Eastern European ethnic Americans in the 7 critical electoral college state and the 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska, where there are 70,000 Czech Americans, about the threat to the historical homelands of our people by the Putin-Trump alliance. This panel is a product of that effort, as are the ads that you will see later that Tom Malinowski is responsible for. I am Mark Siegel. I teach at NYU Center for Global Affairs, and I am a former executive director of the Democratic National Committee before most of you were born. My mother was born and raised in Odessa, Ukraine. My father was born and raised in Kishinev, Moldova. For me, this is not an academic exercise. It is personal. I have skin in this game, and like many of you, I have blood in this game. So thank you very much for coming, and Ambassador?
Let's have a round of applause for Mark. He's put his heart and soul into this effort, and it's going to be in it the whole way. So thank you very much, Mark, for your leadership. Thank you for coming. I'm Jim Rosapep. I've been involved in the Ethnic Council since it was founded in the 90s, along with many of the people in this room. And I'm really proud to work with all of you who I've worked with for a while, and great to see new folks. I was U.S. Ambassador to Romania during the second Clinton term, actually during the war in Kosovo, which was the first time NATO had gone into military action. And so, while it's not personal in the sense, it's professional in the sense that I was there, frontline state, Romania, during the war in the former Yugoslavia. I was born in Italy. Came here at 8 months old. I don't speak Italian, so don't test me. But I want to tell one slight story about Italy. As you may know, in Italy as well as in many other countries in Europe, the right wing has gotten very powerful the way it obviously has in the United States. And in the last Italian elections, the party of Mussolini, basically, the descendant party, won the election. And the prime minister comes from that party. And they were very cozy with Putin, weren't strong supporters of NATO. And then Russia invaded Ukraine. And as you may know now, the Italian government is all in for NATO, is all in for supporting Ukraine. And I talked to a friend of mine who's the governor of Tuscany. I said, he's a Democrat in the Democratic Party of Italy. I said, so why is that? Why all of a sudden did she flip, and why are they supporting us? He said, well, we're only 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine. We remember World War II. The Italian public understands what's going on, and so the way politics works in a democratic society is the leaders follow the people. So I just say that to say what's happened in Western Europe is relevant to this whole conversation. We're going to have a great program today. We're starting off with Tom Malinowski, who Peter will introduce, and then Senator Chris Van Hollen, and my friend Peter Galbraith, who I will introduce a little bit later, and Kerry Kennedy, all who have different but very informed perspectives on this. Last thing I wanted to do before we get the show underway is we have a small enough group. There's so many people who are so knowledgeable in this field, I want to go around and just ask everybody to very briefly introduce yourself. Where you're from in the United States and what your ethnic heritage is. We're going to start in the front row. Sir, where are you from in the United States? What's your ethnic heritage?
I'm Sikh and I'm from Orange County, Irvine.
Terrific, thank you. Please.
I'm Alana Mazarkovich, Ukrainian-American from Philadelphia.
John Benjamin from 8th Congressional District and board member since 2008 from Sikh, but our origins are Eurasian. We're from the Baltics. We go back down to the
Thank you.
My name is Peter Kruger. I'm a German citizen. I'm in the Council of Foreign Relations of Germany and active in the CDU as a foreign policy expert. But my background is my mother was American, German background,
Ah,
and my father German.
terrific. Please. Where are you from in the United States?
Prestville, Michigan.
Terrific. Important state. Please.
Lithuanian American, now from Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Important state.
My name is Ava Barkovich, and I'm Lithuanian-American from Chicago.
Terrific.
Morning, I'm Peter Biberai. I'm of Albanian heritage, born in Montenegro, and I am in Virginia.
Hi, I'm Joni Riker, and I am from California, and I have Scandinavian heritage.
Lear Sirk, Albanian American, California.
And where are you from in the United States? Westchester, New York. Yeah. Thank you.
Marissa Matsouza, Ukrainian-American, Chicago.
Okay, you got a great city here. You got great weather. Please.
Peter Petzotic, I'm actually visiting from Sydney, Australia. I work with the Australian Labor Party working in progressive politics. They're very honored to be here, and I have a Croatian heritage.
Thanks for joining us.
Speaker of Philadelphia, long time MDECC, member, president of the National Federation of French Americans, and a principal of the Central East European Coalition. Spent 7 days in the last 17 months lobbying for Ukraine and DC at Women's Group.
Janice Sarro, I'm Italian-American and currently live in Florida. Proudly with the Italian-American Democratic League.
Exactly, and the leader of the Italian American Women's Group.
I'm Nina Trethel. I am Macedonian-American. I grew up in Michigan, and now I live in Florida. I'm covered.
Thank you.
My name is Ed Vickery. I'm from Massachusetts, and my heritage is Western European.
Thank you. Please.
Nancy Trevino, I'm Mestiza, Mexican-American, was raised in the Rio Grande Valley and Miami, Florida. Now I'm based in DC.
Terrific.
Greg Wojcicki, Philadelphia, Ukrainian-American.
I'm Scott. I'm Irish and Ukrainian by choice.
All right. He also works for Razam, the great Ukrainian American organization, who does such a great job supporting NATO. Yes. Thank you.
Alexandra Lechikova, Polish-American, and I live in Chicago.
Great.
Conrad Novak, Polish-American, 9 years in the U.S. Army, and I serve in the Veterans Outreach for the Ethnic Council, which basically means we've been working a lot helping our Ukrainian brothers and sisters.
Here, here. I don't see who's exactly the next row, whoever is in the next row there. Oh, I missed you. I'm sorry, I missed you. No, please go ahead. I missed you. Great.
Al Damascus, Lithuanian, Chicago.
Julian Haidar, I work with these two gentlemen at Razum. Ukrainian-American, married into a Croatian African-American family, born and raised in Chicago. Very proud of our community here. Thanks all for coming.
You sound like an American to me. Please. Great. Please. We're introducing ourselves.
David Worley, Atlanta, married to a Ukrainian Polish woman.
Terrific.
Victor Berlinski, I'm Ukrainian-American, and I graduated for Razum.
Great.
Caroline Allen, I live in Philadelphia, and I'm Italian.
Welcome. Let's come over here.
Will McConnell from Hunterdon County, New Jersey.
The county chairman.
I know.
Terrific. Thank you. You do. Please. Thank you. Purebred, and the co-chair of the Ethnic Council and the spiritual leader for 3 decades. Yeah, another round of applause for Jim Zogby. Absolutely. Welcome. Thank you. Malcolm. Sir. Welcome. Now over here.
Jack Hanna, an Arab American from Pennsylvania.
Maureen. Perfect combination. I am too. That's the only reason I said that.
John Murphy, Polish-American, born and raised in Chicago.
Wow, what a crowd we have here today. Let's have a round of applause for the whole group of us. We're all in this. We know who we are. We know why we're here. We're getting on with the show. Mark.
It's been my honor to work with Tom Malinowski for the last several months on a project that we think could make a difference. As Michelle said last night, do something. We're trying to do something. Tom has been phenomenal in the ads that you will see as I introduce him. In one of them, you'll hear his beautiful voice. Tom was a congressman from the great Garden State of New Jersey, and he served as Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, Democracy, and Education? Labor, sorry. Malcolm, could you run these ads? Because I want these ads that Tom is so responsible for to be his real introduction.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And when one man is enslaved, all are not free.
American presidents, Republican and Democrat, have always defied Russia's communist dictators and defended American ideals. Kamala Harris gets this.
If we stand by while an aggressor invades its neighbor with impunity, they will keep going.
Kamala Harris will stand up to Putin, protect our allies, and keep us safe.
When Mongol warriors stormed Ukraine, Kyiv's church bells rang a night warning. They rang again when Ukrainians rallied for democracy. Today, they're warning the world of Putin's threat to freedom. Donald Trump embraces Putin.
I like Putin, he likes me.
He picked J.D. Vance.
I don't really care what happens to Ukraine.
Kamala Harris cares. She knows standing up to Putin keeps America safe. America's Future Majority Fund is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
Centuries ago, as invaders marched from the east, a Polish watchman blew his trumpet to warn his people. Today, freedom-loving Poles and Ukrainians are warning us of a new threat. Donald Trump encouraged Putin to attack our allies.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
But Kamala Harris has heard the trumpet call. She will defend our brave allies for their freedom and for ours. America's Future Majority Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
name is Tom, and I'm a Polish American. This feels like one of those meetings. In fact, when I got elected, only after I got elected, somebody told me, you know, you're the first person born in Poland to serve in the U.S. Congress. And I didn't believe it, and it was partially true, because there were a bunch who were born in Poland in the 19th century when it was still part of the Russian Empire against its will. But apparently I was the first to have been born in independent Poland to get elected. So I don't know what's wrong with Chicago that New Jersey got there first, but I'm proud to have that mantle. So let me talk a little bit about the ethos behind this. I've been thinking a lot about the first convention that I finagled my way into as a 19-year-old college student. It was 1984 in San Francisco, California, and we Democrats were nominating Walter Mondale to be our candidate. And around the same time, I forget if it was before or after, the Republicans, they were in Dallas, they nominated Ronald Reagan. And we didn't like each other, right? Because that was our job. We were fighting over all the issues of the day. But I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that if they were all still with us, Walter Mondale would be here with us in Chicago, and Ronald Reagan would be here with us in Chicago. Because we are, as Democrats, we are still, Mondale will be here because we're still Democrats. We are still the only progressive party in America in all the ways that we mean, all the things we mean when we say progressive. But thanks to what's happened to the other side, we are the only conservative party left in America, in the sense that we apply moral and ethical standards to our leaders. We are dedicated to defending and preserving the Constitution and the rule of law in this country. We're the party of patriotism that doesn't denigrate our men and women in uniform and the very idea of service to this country, as we're hearing from the other side. And we're absolutely, right now, the party of national security, the party that is dedicated, committed to standing up to freedom around the world for our allies and against tyrants and dictators. And those were universal concepts, pretty much, in American politics, with the exception of the fringes on both sides, whether it was Reagan, as we saw, telling Gorbachev to tear down that wall, or Clinton or Bush bringing all of the Central European democracies into NATO, or John McCain, Barack Obama, Joe Biden standing up to Putin in Ukraine. That was the consensus. And if you wanted to be a serious leader in America, you pretty much had to accept that consensus. Every president in my lifetime has embraced it except for one guy, who is our opponent in this election. And unfortunately, he's brought a lot of people in the MAGA movement around this idea that none of this matters. None of those old ideals are applicable to our interest and our values anymore. So you have the leader of the Republican Party literally saying, as you saw there, I will encourage our number one adversary in Europe to attack our allies. Not to mention saying he fell in love with Kim Jong-un and he envies the leader of communist China because he, quote, rules with an iron fist. I don't like American leaders talking that way. And more to the point, I don't think most Americans do. I think most Americans hear that kind of language and they say, number one, it's wrong, and number two, it's weird, which I think is a really good concept. Back in the Washington think tanks where, for the last few years we've been saying, like, Donald Trump and MAGA, like, they're violating the norms of American democracy, like we're using highfalutin language that actually just mean they're weird. Because that's what weird means, right? They're outside of the norm. And what they stand for in foreign policy and national security, completely outside the norm, the bipartisan norm that we are all used to. And I think most Americans will see that. It is an article of faith among most political operatives, certainly in the Democratic Party, that foreign policy does not really matter in elections. I ran in 3 really tough congressional elections, and I can say I partly agree with them in the sense that I don't think most elections are about the details of policy. I don't think most people in the swing states are walking around today thinking or saying, you know, I really want to hear more from these candidates about their policy on NATO's force structure in Eastern Europe, right? That's not what this is about. But I do think foreign policy matters profoundly, especially in foreign policy elections, when it gives you a window into the character and the values of the people who are running. Do they share my values? Do I trust them to make the most important decisions that are necessary to keep me and my family and my community and my country safe? Are they going to ensure that America is strong? Are they going to make sure that America is good? Because I think those are the things that most of us as Americans, Republicans, or Democrats want when we think about our policy around the world. And within that, we still argue about so many aspects of it, obviously. And we're seeing appropriate debates right now about our policies towards the Middle East because we disagree about how we should be good and strong. But we don't disagree that that should be the foundation of our policy towards the world. And so what we're aiming to do is to deliver that message to the voters who may very well decide this election, and that is voters in the swing states, particularly Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which, by the way, it so happens have the highest concentrations of Central European American voters in the country: Polish American, Ukrainian American, Croatian American, Albanian American. I won't mention all of them, but we know who we are and who they are. And they're classic swing voters. There are over 1 million of them in each of those 3 states. And if this election is decided, as it was in 2020, by a few tens of thousands of votes in those 3 states, plus a couple of others that we may be competing in, then a project that speaks to these people in terms that they will understand, around values that they care about, and an interest that they believe that's personal to them, is a project that I think could actually make the difference one way or another in this presidential election. So, no pressure. Thank you.
He's a terrific guy. We should send him back to Congress. I would like to introduce a very, very special person, Kerry Kennedy. Kerry is the president of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. She is one of the greatest human rights leaders in the entire world. She's the 7th child of the beloved Robert Kennedy and the amazing Ethel Kennedy. I worked in the 1964 New York primary campaign for Bobby Kennedy, and then in the 1968 presidential campaign in Indiana when I was a graduate student at Northwestern right here. And Kerry, your family has meant a great deal to me all my life. The 18 minutes I spent on the floor at the 64 convention when your father was introduced were the greatest, to me, most emotional 18 minutes of my life. And the convention people only stopped the cheering by calling for a minute of silence for Adlai Stevenson. If it wasn't for that, we'd still be cheering for your father. Also, your sister Kathleen is a great friend of mine, and Ambassador Albright, and we feel like your family, and thank you for doing everything you're doing to save people.
Good to see you. I'm happy to be here today. I just made it in. It was not easy. Was it easy for you finding this place? No. This place we'd have 10 times as many people if if everyone wasn't caught in that rabbit warren. So I was asked to speak about Ukraine and the and U.S. policy in Ukraine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Well, there are multiple critical dimensions to the situation in Ukraine. I want to focus on one that often goes overlooked in conversations about the war effort. The security situation and the economic implications, and that's the critical investment in human rights and humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. Earlier this year, my colleagues and I from Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights took a fact-finding delegation to the country. The sights and the sounds and the stories I heard will stay with me forever. Imagine standing with me in St. Andrew's Church in Bucha. The air is thick with the scent of incense and sorrow. Sunlight filters through the stained glass windows, illuminating faces etched with grief and determination. It was here, in this sacred space, that has witnessed centuries of history, that I was asked a question that echoed in my mind throughout our visit. Why are Americans backing off their commitment to stop Putin's war of aggression and hold him accountable? Why? The pain in the voice of the person asking was palpable, their eyes searching mine for answers, for hope. How could I respond to such raw anguish? Let me share with you some of the people I met, whose stories paint the broader picture and importance of investing in human rights in Ukraine. In a small, sparsely furnished room, I met 3 children. The youngest one was 6 years old. Their eyes, once bright with childhood innocence, now held a darkness no child should know. These little ones were kidnapped by Russian forces and taken to an encampment outside of Moscow, where they were offered up for adoption like commodities. The oldest child, a girl, perhaps 10, held her siblings close, her small frame rigid with a protectiveness far beyond her years. In a rehabilitation hospital I sat beside young men barely older than boys. The antiseptic smell couldn't mask the underlying scent of fear and determination. These brave souls, 16, 17, 18 years old, lay in bed, some missing limbs, others struggling to move. Yet in their eyes burned a fierce pride. One young man, his arm ending abruptly at the elbow, reached out with his remaining hand and gripped mine. "We fight for all of you," he said, his voice strong despite his weakened body. On a quiet street, I met a grandmother, her weathered hands twisting a handkerchief as she spoke. Her voice trembled as she recounted driving her grandchild home when Russian soldiers opened fire. The love and anguish in her eyes as she described holding her grandchild for the last time. It was really almost too much to bear. And in a small apartment, a mother showed me photos of her son and husband. Her fingers traced their smiling faces as she told me how her youngest son begged Russian soldiers to let him hold his father, who lay dying in the street, shot apparently out of boredom. As they walked home from buying groceries, the ordinary turned tragic in an instant. And then, standing amidst the rubble that was once a home in Kherson, a woman told me about her experience. Her house had endured 16 missile attacks. 16 times she had picked up the pieces, literally and figuratively. As we stood there, the wind whistling through shattered windows, she pointed to a small flower pushing through the debris. "Life goes on," she said simply, "and so must we." These are not just statistics or news headlines. These are real people with real lives and dreams and families, all shattered by this senseless war. Their stories underscore the most urgent need for immediate humanitarian aid, but they also speak to the incredible resilience of the Ukrainian people. As I walked through cities bearing the scars of war, I was struck by the juxtaposition of destruction and determination. In Kyiv, I saw buildings pockmarked by shelling, their windows blown out, standing next to cafes where people gathered, determined to maintain a sense of normalcy. In the countryside, farmers worked fields dotted with warning signs about landmines, risking their lives to feed their nation. But our support for Ukraine must go beyond addressing these immediate crises. We must invest in the long-term transformation of Ukraine, supporting their efforts to build a more just, democratic, and resilient society. Let me explain why this dual approach, addressing both immediate needs and long-term transformation, is so crucial. First, the immediate humanitarian needs. Many don't realize that the recent bipartisan aid package for Ukraine wasn't just about military aid. It also included crucial humanitarian support that will pay the salaries of over 600,000 educators, support more than 500,000 healthcare workers, fund 50,000 plus first responders, keep the lights on in schools and hospitals, provide vital services Ukrainians need to survive this brutal war. This immediate aid is essential. It's about keeping Ukrainian society functioning in the face of unimaginable adversity. It's about ensuring that children can continue their education, that the sick and wounded can receive care, and that basic services continue to operate. This is not just about survival, it's about maintaining the fabric of society in the face of aggression. But our vision and our support must extend beyond the immediate crisis. This brings me to the second crucial aspect of our support, investing in Ukraine's long-term transformation. I want to tell you about Andrei Kostin, Ukraine's prosecutor general. Despite the enormous challenges of war, Kostin is working to shift Ukraine's entire criminal legal system away from the old Soviet style focused on punishments and convictions to a new system where rehabilitation of the victim is the primary aim. Can you imagine that? That doesn't exist in any country on earth. And that's what his vision is. We need that in our country too. His team includes people like Yulia Yusenko, who's leading efforts to address gender-based violence and domestic violence, crimes that increase exponentially during and after war. They've trained thousands of law enforcement officers and developed a roadmap to reform their antiquated system. Then there's Zurab, known for his anti-corruption work in Georgia, and Yuri, heading the War Crimes Division after years of working in civil society to reform the criminal legal system. These efforts represent profound transformation. They're not just about winning a war. They're about building a better society in its wake. By supporting these initiatives, we're helping Ukraine lay the groundwork for a more just, equitable, and democratic nation. And this is why sustained U.S. support is so crucial. We're not just helping Ukraine defend its territory today. We're investing in a stronger, more democratic partner for tomorrow. We're supporting a vision of governance that aligns with our values and strengthens the global community of democracies. Moreover, our sustained support sends a powerful message to the world. It tells our allies in South Korea, Japan, Europe, and beyond that America keeps its promises. It demonstrates our commitment to democracy and human rights, not just in words, but in action. The Ukrainian people are not just asking us to fight their war. They're asking for our support as they fight for their lives, their freedom, and the values we all hold dear. They are fighting with extraordinary courage and resilience. The least we can do is stand with them, not just in the heat of battle, but in the long, challenging work of rebuilding and transformation that will follow. In closing, I urge you to consider our support for Ukraine not as a short-term crisis response, but as a long-term investment in a more stable, democratic world. By addressing immediate humanitarian needs and supporting long-term reforms, we're not just helping Ukraine, were shaping the future of global democracy. The faces I saw, the stories I heard, the resilience I witnessed, these are not just memories. They are a call to action. Let us answer that call with unwavering support, with compassion, and with a commitment to stand with Ukraine, not just today, but for all the tomorrows to come. Thank you. Thank you. So kind. Thank you.
Wow. Our next speaker, come on up, Chris. Everybody knows Chris Van Hollen, so come on up, Chris. I think most people in this convention know him in two big ways. One is a tremendous leader in the United States Senate on foreign policy and on our values. Member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, active across the board in foreign policy issues, very active on this issue, which he's going to talk about. But also as a big leader of the Democratic Party. In the House, leader, campaign committee, Senate leader, campaign committee. He does more to build our party than any other United States senator that I know. So for we Democrats who are concerned about foreign policy, he's the guy. Two things that probably most people know, but maybe some people don't know, is that he and Peter Galbraith, when they were on the staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the 1980s, were the ones who found and disclosed Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons against the Kurds. So he's been fighting this fight his entire career. Second thing I want to say, and this is simply personal, is he and I served together in the Maryland House of Delegates in the 1990s. And I can say without fear of contradiction, because it's my opinion, he is the single best legislator I have ever worked with in my entire career. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jim. I want to start with some thank yous, beginning with all of you who are gathered here and those who are watching, who care so much about our country's future and understand that we're fighting for democracy here at home, but also democracy around the world. And that's what's at stake. To Jim Rosapep, a dear friend, I want to thank him not only for his important work with the Ethnic Council, but for his service first in the Maryland House of Delegates and the Senate, where we worked very closely together, and importantly as our ambassador to Romania. Jim, thank you very, very much for all of that. And talking about an effective legislator, Jim Rosapep, thank you for all that you've done. Jim Zogby, I don't know if I want to thank Jim Zogby, who's the chair, of course. Jim, it's really great to be with you. Thank you for all the polling you've done on so many important issues and for your leadership in our country. We're really grateful. And to the fellow panelists here, Mark Siegel, I've also known for a very long time. Mark, thank you for all the work that you do to help educate our country about all the issues that we're talking about here today and more. And of course, Tom Malinowski. We miss him in the Congress, but he is doing great work around the country. He is such an important voice in our country on foreign policy issues. And while he's no longer in the House, we remain in very close communication. So Tom, thank you for all that you're doing as we go forward and what you've done. Kerry Kennedy, thank you for your passionate remarks today. Most importantly, thank you for what you're doing to carry on the cause of human rights around the world, you and your family. Thank you. And to Peter Galbraith, who I've known for a very long time, a dear friend. As Jim Rosapep said, we served back in the day on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and there's nobody who knows these issues better than Peter Galbraith, especially, of course, when it comes to issues in the Middle East and South Asia, but also globally. And, you know, Peter and I just saw each other up in Vermont at his place, and we were talking about all the issues that bring us to this convention today in this moment. So, Peter, thank you very much for all your work. Now, I do hail from the great state of Maryland, and in Maryland, we call ourselves America in miniature. This is not just a tourism bumper sticker. It is absolutely the case. If you look at the state of Maryland, we are one of the most diverse states in the country. People from all over the world, including, importantly, countries hailed immigrants from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. I just came this morning from the Maryland breakfast, and we had the daughter of Baltimore, Nancy Pelosi, speak. So she was, and of course, John Sarbanes, a congressman who's retiring, of Greek-American ancestry, and of course, my predecessor, the great Barbara Mikulski, you know, part of the Polish-American community in Baltimore. So if you look at Baltimore and if you look at Maryland, you really do see that great mix of Americans who hailed from all over the world to make America their home. I know the Netherlands don't necessarily always come to mind when people think about different ethnic groups, but I did co-chair the Dutch caucus, I want you to know, in the House of Representatives, along with Peter Hoekstra, who's a Republican. And, you know, he was a first-generation immigrant in his family from the Netherlands. My family came many years before that, but it was a great mix of sort of the new and old immigrant tradition in the United States. So let me just say to all of you, Maryland may be American miniature, but we call it American miniature because of America's great diversity. And all of you in this room represent an important part of that. And what's at stake in our country right now is indeed, as Joe Biden said when he ran the first time, fighting for the soul of America. What does it mean? And America is a country that welcomes people around the world, people who want to make America their home, people who embrace our values, the values of democracy, the values of human rights, the values of freedom. That is what we are. We are, as others have said, an idea. And what it means to be American is no matter where you come from, to embrace that idea. We are here at the Democratic Convention where that idea is under attack right now. There's no doubt that if you listen to Donald Trump, he does not believe in an America for all of us. As both the Obamas laid out very clearly last night, the whole idea that Donald Trump proposes is an America just for some of us, which is why his whole approach is to divide us against one another, based on ethnicity, based on race, based on any kind of division that he can find. He drives a wedge to divide us, and he will do anything to try to accomplish that. So that is why we say this is the most important election of our lifetime, because it is, because I do believe the future of democracy here at home is at stake. But we also know it's at stake around the world. And we have lots of challenges worldwide, but the immediate and present danger is Putin's continuing assault on the people of Ukraine. That is the issue that is here and now, and we do, as Americans, have an absolute obligation to help the Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom and democracy, and there's only one candidate for president who's going to do that, and that is Vice President Kamala Harris. She has been crystal clear since she became vice president that she has been a full partner in Joe Biden's efforts when it comes to fighting Putin's aggression. I have attended a number of recent Munich security conferences, and in the last two, and I think she may have done three, it is Vice President Harris who has been carrying the torch for the United States. And the big issue that's been central to those security conferences has, of course, been the war in Ukraine. I was at the Munich Security Conference when the United States was warning countries around the world of Putin's impending aggression and assault and attack. Many did not believe it. But it was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris who helped rally the NATO community together. And they had a lot of work to do to repair the damage that had been done by Donald Trump. When you go to Europe right now, and you all know this, you hear a lot of fear about what will happen if the American people were to make the wrong choice in November. Because Donald Trump has been very clear. He sees everything as a transaction. He sees everything as a transaction, and the NATO partnership for him is just a series of bilateral transactions with the member countries, not the fundamental idea behind NATO, which is all for one and one for all. That is not the way Donald Trump thinks about our country or about the world. And so if we're going to maintain support for Ukraine, it's going to be essential that we have a president in the White House who believes that in her heart, in her core. And that is Kamala Harris. Now, we all witnessed months of fighting in the Congress to provide the most recent round of funding, U.S. funding, to support Ukraine's military operations and some of the economic help. And it should not have taken that long. I mean, that time, as we know, was time that, Putin, put to work. I mean, people were literally running out of ammunition on the front lines. So we got it done, but it did not have to be that hard. And the reality is the reason it was that hard is because Donald Trump, on the campaign trail, made it clear that he was not a supporter of that funding. And unfortunately, the Republican Party has become a personality cult. We see this on issue after issue. Issues where Republicans as a party used to take a stand in favor of our alliances and American security. When Donald Trump took a different course, everybody followed him off that cliff. You cannot recognize the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan in today's Republican Party. And I do think this is just from a pure political perspective, and you've probably already talked about this on the panel. For the generation that I grew up in and the generation before, there were a lot of immigrants who came to the United States from Eastern Europe who perceived that it was the Republican Party that was the party that would stand up to communism, to the Soviet Union. But I cannot imagine Donald Trump saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, with the purpose of trying to maintain unity, with the purpose of trying to prevent Russian aggression going forward. And so for all of those voters who are immigrants from Eastern Europe and other parts of Europe and beyond, who remember that old Republican Party, it's simply not there anymore. And it's our job to make sure that all of those voters know what's at stake, because democracy at home is at stake, but as we all know, democracy in Ukraine is at stake. Frankly, democracy around the world is at stake. As Kerry said, and others probably amplified, the reality is that this is a fight for the people of Ukraine, but it is much bigger than that. It is a fight for freedom. If we do not sustain our efforts on behalf of the people of Ukraine, our NATO allies will no longer believe that our assurances are credible. And it's not just our NATO allies. We've had the prime ministers of Japan and the prime minister of South Korea, the Republic of Korea, before the Congress in the last couple years. Both of them emphasized that as Xi, President Xi and others are looking around the world, they are looking very closely at what's happening in Ukraine and whether our support for the people of Ukraine will be sustained. As I say, Xi has one eye on Ukraine and the other eye on Taiwan. And our allies in East Asia, whether it's Japan or South Korea or the Philippines, they're all watching closely because they will read this as an indication of the United States' determination and that of our NATO allies. And we're also finally getting our NATO allies to recognize that the PRC does pose an important challenge to our values around the world. We're finally getting NATO in its most recent statement to talk about how NATO will also play a role in addressing the China challenge. And if we're not successful at sustaining this fight going forward against Putin, then we're not going to be able to continue to sustain that support from NATO and the G7, and we'll lose our support among our friends in East Asia. So that's why in this election, democracy here at home, but also around the world, and freedom around the world really is at stake. And I think we need to make sure that the voters understand that that freedom and democracy is on the ballot, whether it's protecting what we cherish here at home, but also the values that we've stood up for and the international order that we've stood up for around the world. And just to close, I do think as we look at other parts of the world that's going to be very important, and to Kerry Kennedy and your entire team, you know, we want to make sure that we are standing up for our principles and values in Ukraine, but everywhere else around the world. And I think that's very important for our own credibility. If the United States is going to continue to be that beacon of freedom and democracy, we need to make sure, even in this imperfect and very messy world, that we do our very best to uphold those values. But I will close with what we know and why we're here at the Democratic Convention, which is there's only one candidate on the ballot that's prepared to do that, and that is Kamala Harris. And Tim Walz, I must say, having served with him in the House, he is a great pick. He's going to be a great vice president. And I see Jim here, but I do want to make just 2 points, because I did used to chair the DCCC, and I chaired the DSCC this cycle 6 years ago. It's a tough cycle. But if President Harris is going to be able to get another continuing sustained support for Ukraine through the United States Congress, she needs the votes. She's been on the screen, you know, pretty much every night during this convention, providing an example how when we were a 50-50 Senate, she provided a critical tie-breaking vote. If we do not have the votes, we cannot, no matter what the president wants, deliver that assistance. And so we've got to take the majority in the House of Representatives. We have to keep the United States Senate. And I will close, as I began, with Maryland, close to home. Angela Alsobrooks spoke last night in front of the Democratic Convention. She gave a great speech. Ben Cardin, who's done a fantastic job on behalf of our state and country, is retiring. Angela Alsobrooks is the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. I will tell you that Mitch McConnell recruited our former governor, Republican governor, to run against him. Whether Marylanders liked or disliked Larry Hogan as governor, the fact of the matter is, and you all know this, in this today's Senate, a vote for Larry Hogan is a vote for Ted Cruz. It's a vote for all of the Republicans, Mitch McConnell, and it also includes all the MAGA Republicans in the United States Senate. Those Republicans who do not believe in supporting the people of Ukraine in their fight against Putin, and who do not believe in making sure that U.S. values are protected overseas. So we are in the political fight of our lives. We all are feeling great energy. We need to translate that energy into votes. Come November, let's make sure that we protect democracy here at home and democracy in Ukraine, and protect the values of freedom and human rights and democracy around the world. Thank all of you for being part of that.
Stay right here. Chris has agreed to take a couple of questions. Anybody out here want to ask Chris about anything? Yes, sir. Your favorite Nikolai Gogol story?
I'm sorry, I don't. Okay. All right.
Good try, though. Stumped Chris. Okay, he's going to talk to him afterward. Yes, please.
Oh my goodness! I mean, I could talk at length about that. I mean, but I'm glad you flagged that issue as something we all need to be working towards. Right? We now have a cyber coordinator at the White House. We have, the cyber security mandate is something we need to make a whole of government effort. We obviously need to work closely with the folks in the private sector because a lot of them, especially those that have, contracts with the U.S. government, are also subject to these attacks. So the bottom line is, I think that we need to do a lot more here at home to protect cybersecurity and protect, our friends around the world. So this is an area where the technology is constantly in motion. I was talking earlier today about, quantum computing. Quantum computing obviously has potential great benefits, but it also has the potential to break encryption, and there are all sorts of issues that come together with both cybersecurity and these other technologies. But I'm glad I raised the issue because it doesn't get enough attention in my mind. Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Yes.
One more. Yes. Last one.
Kerry Kennedy mentioned about the children that are kidnapped and taken to Russia. So what is Congress going to do about the thousands of children that have been subjected to kidnapping and being forced to give up their nationality and forced to accept Russian citizenship?
Well, what Congress has done is two things. Number one, named it for what it is, which is a war crime. The other thing we've done is to provide, after too long a battle, the resources to the people of Ukraine so that they can win this battle and address those issues. We also very much support, in fact, I was together with Kerry Kennedy a while ago with the special prosecutor for Ukraine, who's been very, very focused on these issues. So I think it's important that as we help the Ukrainian people prosecute this war, we also, as you indicate, make clear that people involved in these crimes will be held accountable going forward.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Go get them. Thanks so much. We appreciate everyone who came here today, and you can see why we're birds of a feather here, and I think his call to action is something that is preaching to the converted, but we can all use reinforcement of what we have to do over these next, it's 70 days, whatever it is. And we're the folks in this room who can make such a big impact in these areas because everyone here knows America and they know the stakes in the world. Now, last but definitely not least, is Ambassador Peter Galbraith. And I think, again, many of you know him as a great ambassador to Croatia. You know his work with Chris Van Hollen on revealing the chemical weapons that Saddam Hussein was using in Iraq. What you don't know is that he and I went to high school together. And you probably know that, you may not put it this way, that so far as we know, we're the only two former United States ambassadors who came back to the United States and got elected to our state senates. The former state senator from this great state of Vermont, terrific ambassador, Peter Galbraith.
Well, thank you. And what a pleasure it is to be on this panel with my former staff colleague, Chris Van Hollen. And I could tell you many stories, including sleeping in the mountains on the Iraq-Turkey border as we were documenting the use of chemical weapons against the Kurds and the Kurdish genocide. And there's a story there because the Senate had unanimously passed the Prevention of Genocide Act of 1988 to impose comprehensive sanctions on Saddam Hussein. And then when it went to the House, the special interests dug in turned out a lot of rice was exported to Iraq. I didn't quite realize that we grew rice in the United States. Being from Vermont, we don't grow it in Vermont. And a number of other interests. And then the Reagan administration opposed the bill. Colin Powell said even cutting off U.S. aid to Iraq was too extreme. That was '88. Of course, in 1990, 2 years later, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And it is my belief to this day that had we stood up to Saddam Hussein, had we stood up to the thug, had we stood up for human rights, that war might not have happened. He might not have thought he could get away with the invasion of Kuwait. And I'll come back to that on a word on Ukraine, but I have to say some word about my good friend Mark Siegel, who is a champion of democracy on Pakistan. For many years, we were both dear friends of Benazir Bhutto. Tom Malinowski, Assistant Secretary of Human Rights, Member of Congress, and most importantly, on the staff of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, with whom I work closely. And Carrie, well, the Galbraiths and the Kennedys go way back, because my father was connected with not only your father, but all your uncles. Joe, your Uncle Joe, who died in the Second World War, and Jack were his tutees in Winthrop House at Harvard. And of course, he was Jack Kennedy's ambassador to India, an advisor on economic issues. Actually, my father was an agricultural economist. And 1956, your Uncle Jack was a candidate for vice president. It was an open convention to be Stevenson's running mate. And he lost because he kind of screwed it up with the farmers from Iowa and Kansas and so on. And he turned to my father, he said, "Ken, I want you to be my advisor on all things related to agriculture. The only person I want to hear from on this subject, but I don't want to hear very much from you." And of course, I also actually, in saving Benazir Bhutto's life with your Uncle Ted, when I was working with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and many other issues. I have to say, the one bust that I have on display, because I'm not big on the I Love Me stuff, is the bust my father got from the Robert Kennedy Foundation, that wonderful piece of art. And Jim and I, of course, served in the Balkans, and I want to call out to Steve Rukavina and all he's done with the Croatian American community. I came here, Carrie had such a wonderful account of, and such a moving account of her trip to Ukraine. I also went there after the invasion. I was been talking to the people in Moldova about how they might respond if the Russians took Odessa, which looked possible in early months of the invasion. And I went to Odessa, and so I can't talk as movingly as Carrie did, but I can do, like first grade, a show and tell. This is a Ukrainian postage stamp put now on a bag, and it shows the soldier on Snake Island giving the finger and saying, "Fuck you." Are we being recorded? Oh, well, screw you, to the Russians. One of the features of being in the state Senate and any elective office is that you end up, everything's been said on the topic, but not everybody has yet said it. And so I'm not going to try to repeat everything that has been said on Ukraine, because it's been said so well by my fellow panelists. But I just want to make a couple of really important points. In my career, I've been deeply involved with Iraq, and also my last diplomatic assignment was in Afghanistan. And to paraphrase Bob Dole, both of these were Republican wars. He called World War II a Democrat war in his 1976 debate with Mondale. But in any event, I want you to think about the cost. The Iraq war has cost $2.89 trillion. It's taken 5,500 American soldier lives, and many more contractors, and many more injured in ways that they will never have a normal life. The war in Afghanistan has cost $2 trillion. about 2,600 American lives lost, and again, many more injured in ways that they will never have a normal life. So far, the United States has provided $90 billion to help the people of Ukraine defend themselves. And that is that's a fraction of the total money being provided, which is about $400 billion. And why is that? About 25%, maybe 30%, the largest donor. But it's because we have allies. We have NATO, an alliance that Donald Trump clearly wants to get rid of. Now, when I was ambassador to Croatia, the issue was what was going to be the future of Croatia. It was quite an isolated country. Now, it has achieved its goal of being part of NATO, part of the European Union. But what is being worth being part of NATO if NATO no longer has America as its participant? Would it even exist? So there's a huge amount at stake in this election. I just want to say one other thing about why what we're doing in Ukraine is so important and why it is so much less costly than what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. Incidentally, a country far more important than those two. It's less costly because the Ukrainians are doing the fighting. We do not have, there's not a single American who has died in that conflict. It is, we are helping other people defend themselves. And that is a huge distinction. And when we talk about what's at stake there, and this will be my final point, what is at stake is not just the security of Europe, not just our own security, not just democracy, but the entire international system that has kept peace since World War II. Think about all the wars in the centuries preceding 1945. They were based on one country or countries attacking another country's seized territory. The war that began 85 years ago, this September 1st, with the German invasion of Poland, it was to seize Polish territory, to seize Danzig. Well, that didn't happen since 1945, partly because of the UN system. And when Saddam tried it in Kuwait, he failed. So we cannot let Putin get away with it in Ukraine, any part of Ukraine, not Crimea, not Donbass, and certainly not the whole country, because not only is the future of Ukraine at stake, but the entire system that has kept peace in our lifetimes is at stake. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thanks to all our panelists. We got time to have some questions, and we're going to do that, but I want to ask, if you did not introduce yourself earlier because you came in a little later, we want you to introduce yourself. So we'll just raise your hand. If you've not introduced yourself, please introduce yourself. I don't know who exactly that is, but you know who you are. Please, introduce yourselves, please. Thank you very much. Anyone else on this side who did not introduce themselves? Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, Kristen. Thank you. There's no coincidence here that we got two Italians and we got two Romanians. Anyone else on this side? Yes. Thank you very much. Brenda? Anyone else on this side didn't introduce themselves? Okay, how about in the middle? Oh, yes, please. And ethnic background? Ukrainian American. There you go. Yeah, sir. Please. Yes. Great. Thank you for joining us. Yes. I'm so sorry. You're the point of the spear. Yes. Anyone else in the middle? Yes, please. Thank you for joining us. Anyone else in the middle didn't introduce themselves? Terrific. On this side, yes. Great, thank you. Anyone else over here not introduced themselves? Oh, please, sir.
My name is Kent Grove. I'm a delegate and elector for the state of Kansas, along with my wife, Joanne. Joanne's grandfather was Ukrainian. He was part of the White Guard who fled in 1919 when the Bolsheviks took over. And even when we visited him in his nursing home before he passed away, he was always afraid that the Russians would come over here and harm him and his family. And this is my wife, Joanne.
Joanne, thank you for joining us. We had a couple folks who just walked in. We're introducing ourselves, what our ethnic heritage is, and where we're from in the United States. No, no kidding. Thank you. We have some other folks who just came in. We're introducing ourselves, our ethnicity, and where we're from in the United States. Thank you. Terrific. Thank you for joining us. Going once? Yes, here, please. Yes, please, sir.
I'm Marty Dunleavy. I'm from New Haven, Connecticut. I spent about half of my life working for your family. Special Olympics, your uncle. But now I am on the clerk staff in the state senate, and I am a commissioner of the Irish Connecticut Trade Commission.
Terrific. Yes.
Hi, all. I'm Peter Tennessee from DC by way of Ohio, by way of Macedonia. Current USA appointee in the Bureau for Democracy and Special Presence, former DNC and Biden campaign, and this is my first in-person.
Terrific. Please. Terrific. Please, miss. Wow, thank you for joining us. If I missed anybody, not had a chance to introduce themselves, going once, going twice. Okay, we got 2 paid commercials before we get to the question and answer. One is when we're finished with this program, we're going to take a group picture. So don't run out the door immediately unless you don't want to be in the picture. Run out the door if you don't want to be. Secondly, the Ethnic Council has led the efforts over decades to make sure the voices of the people in this room and all the people that we know and love have a voice in the Democratic Party. And it continues today, obviously. One of the major initiatives that we've worked on and finally been successful with is to get the Democratic National Committee to identify over 150 ethnic groups on the voter database that all state parties now have. So, and I say this with intensity, is most, and you can see it listing all of our stories here, everybody knows their family history. It's not just us. It's like every American, every person in the world knows their family history. The Democratic Party has not recently respected that. They've lumped people into groups, big groups. Round of applause for that. I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's cost us votes over these recent decades. We have the opportunity this year, the Harris-Walz campaign has the opportunity, every one of the state coordinated campaigns, both in the swing states and in the other states, as Senator Van Hollen said, we got to win House races, we got to win Senate races. My pitch to you is go back to your state, go back to your state party and say, I want access to the database of voters identified by ethnicities. So I can identify in Virginia the Albanian American swing voters. So I can have my Albanian American Democrats call them and say, here's why as an Albanian American, I'm voting for Harris. Same for Italians, same for Romanians, same for Polish, same for Ukrainians. So thank you. Well, it's important because the infrastructure of the Democratic Party is not as sophisticated about this, frankly, as everybody in this room is. So it's very important. We're going to get information out to everybody that will give you more detail about that. But I want you to, but you can go back on Monday or you can go back to your delegation today and say, when am I going to get access to this database that the state party has that identifies people by individual ethnicity? Okay, with that, we're going to open up for questions. Who wants to go first? In the back. I'm sorry, sir. You got to speak up a little bit more for us to.
Germans from Russia group in our area, and they're supporting Trump, and they're opposing the Ukrainians, and they're not trying to help them bring people over or send refugee help or anything. It just really fries my temperament. What have we got to do to get those Ukrainians from Russia fired up and support their own people?
Any comments on that question? I appreciate the perspective. It's not one that I frankly thought of. Anyone want to make a comment on that? Yeah, please. You got a microphone right there.
Fortunately, our program has done some polling, and we've identified who's with us, who's against us, but more important, 30% of the sample were persuadable voters, and that's the people that we're going to be targeting.
Please, yeah, Elir.
So I have a question. Terrific acts that were shared at the beginning of the program. Can you talk to us a little bit about your intentions with that? What's the strategy? Are you putting them out? Are we sending them out? Are we collecting donations? Tell
Let me just add to this, and I'm going to take the next question. So, number one, if any of you in this room have ideas of major, major donors who would be interested in this, talk to Tom, talk to Mark, talk to me today, and we'll help you because we got to get these on the air and you can help. That's number one. Number two is we've set up this in a way that with a little bit of extra money, it can be tailored to individual ethnic communities. So for about $10,000 a piece, we can do the Albanian version of it, or we can do the Croatian version, or we can do the Italian version of it, or we can do the Romanian version of it. So keep that in mind too. We need some bigger money to put the show on the road, but the smaller amounts of money we can tailor it to individual ethnic communities. Please.
Just to follow up on that, the question and the discussion on these ads, it looks like you're not looking for us to provide that ads in some form through our own networks into the media. We just basically, I think you're saying you need more money to nationalize this thing and you'll handle it. This group is not that involved.
Well, no, we will.
Do both.
Yeah, we do both, right? So, again, I want to be serious. I'm trying to win this election for Kamala Harris. We are all trying to do that, right? We didn't make these ads just to feel good, right? And so a foundational part of this project is, and this is underway, I'm confident we're going to get there, and we would love your help, it is in raising a couple of $1 million basically so that we can do this properly. Once that is done, there's an equally important element of this strategy. That's the top-down part.
You're the bottom up.
Is the bottom up. And we are absolutely going to want everybody in this room, if you think this is a good message, we're going to ask you to amplify it in your communities, using the content we've provided, but also creating your own. Some of the most effective political communications in America is in the form of basically homemade videos and messages and posts on local discussion boards and through people's individual social media, because a lot of voters will trust something that is not as slick and professional as the ads that you just saw, that is really just you talking to your family and neighbors. And so so part two of this project is going to be encouraging and empowering people to do that, and then maybe we can boost it a little bit, which takes a much smaller amount of resources than is required for the main part of the project.
But you're saying, but let me just restate the question. It sounds like you're asking them, what can you do? Well, I can wait till you're ready, or we have existing networks.
Absolutely.
Tailor it to, but I don't have anything to use right now. Tomorrow, could I do something with what you presented?
I think we'll be there probably in a couple of weeks. So by the way, these are rough cuts.
Yeah, these are not the final versions.
Like, we got to work on the sound. I think, Jim, you mentioned my voice is on one of the ads. I don't think they'll stay my voice.
Oh, he's great. He's got a new career.
So we're at a stage where we want to show these to people who can help get the project to where it needs to be. I want people to be excited about the message and the way in which we're providing, the way in which we're presenting the message. So you basically saw one ad that's kind of generic, the positive Kamala Harris ad. One ad that was very specifically tailored to my Polish American community, the one with the trumpeter. Any Polish person will know what that is. Other people will probably not know what that is. And then another that was tailored with a similar kind of story to the Ukrainian American community. We're going to produce more stuff at some point. We're going to get these in shape.
And we'll share them with you.
We'll share them.
Absolutely.
So we want to do what you're saying. I just want to do a lot more than that. And that will require all this work.
Next question, please. Either one.
Real quick. So think maybe ahead of we got the 76 days with all hands on deck, but thinking beyond this election, if I may, since we've all came here, I was raised Ukrainian American. My grandparents were raised Republicans. My parents were raised Republicans until Hillary Clinton ran. So they made that shift, but a lot of the diaspora had not. I think the J.D. Vance election was maybe the most consequential that we've seen, where a lot of Ukrainian Americans from the Ohio community still voted for
I have some views on that, but I want to turn it over to whoever wants to address this first. Tom?
They are recognizing rather than have recognized, if you see the distinction. They are recognizing that this is a community that is particularly important especially those three swing states. And I think they are recognizing that more than in 2016, more than in 2020, the message really hits home for people. It should have in those other elections, obviously. But there's something about having a guy running for president literally saying, I will not protect you, I will encourage Putin to do whatever the hell he wants. Thank you, Donald Trump, for putting it so simply, plainly. We have not had a vice presidential candidate who literally said, I do not care what happens to Ukraine. You can't be more clear than that. So they are recognizing it, and they have, the Biden campaign pulled this issue. They pulled the argument that we are making, and they found it was one of the best performing arguments of any with all voters, not just Ukrainian Americans and Croatian Americans. But there's still a reluctance, I think, among some of the operatives to understand how foreign policy issues can affect an election, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. And, you know, these communities have kind of leaned Republican in recent years, so we're not as used to as a party winning among them. Here's where we come in. I think we're gonna convince a lot of Democrats to invest in this year. If we are as successful as I think this might be, let's say it's a close election, and we can demonstrate that now that we have all this data, that these communities made the difference, you're going to see that will basically seal the deal in terms of the Democratic Party understanding the importance of better outreach and talking the language that these communities understand. So they're almost there. We can get them across the finish line if we now do the work of helping to elect Harris on this message.
Thank you. Anybody over here? Yeah, please. Yeah. We want to see the outfit again. Thank you. Please. Thank you. No, it's a absolutely. We should in all the communities. I hope folks in this room are doing it, and other folks are doing it as well. That's very important. Thank you for what you're doing. Yes. First of all, yeah, this is a round of applause. Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, the Ethnic Council is broadly open to ethnic groups, folks with ties and interests related to European and Mediterranean ethnic groups. That's number one. Number two is we have a number of people here who are not of Central and Eastern European heritage. And this specific event, we invited everyone to come, and whoever came, came. The second point I'd make more broadly, and this underlines a little bit what Tom was saying about the polling. Let me ask you a question. Who do you think is the most unpopular public figure among Americans today? Most unpopular public figure among Americans today, of all Americans of all kinds. Who do you think is the most unpopular? Vladimir Putin. He has a 90% unfavorable rating in the United States. He is a unifying figure among Americans. It's not just Eastern Europeans, it's not just Western Europeans, it's everybody. And that's a part of the message that you've seen at the convention. I mean, speakers are talking about Ukraine, they're talking about Putin, they're talking what's going on, not just because our communities are affected by it, but because most Americans understand the point that all our speakers have been made. This is not just about one piece of real estate, one country, Ukraine. This is about peace and democracy in the world. So I think that message is getting through, and we need to repeat it. Yes, sir. Sure. Wow. That's a great statistic. Thank you. Thank you. Tremendous contribution. Thank you. We got time for a couple more questions. Yes, or comments.
We arrived a little late and did not see the ads at the end of this meeting. Would you please put them on again so we can see them?
Great idea. We can do that, Malcolm? Yes. Okay, what we're going to do, because I want to get a group picture before we leave. So we will do the group. Marianne, where are we doing the picture? You want to do it outside? No. Okay. Okay. All right. We'll turn around and do it that way. Okay. We'll do that in. I'm sorry? Okay. All right. A couple more questions or comments. Please, Ilana.
Okay. This is a paid announcement.
Okay. Sure, please. Thank you so much for your hospitality. This is hospitality of ethnic Americans. Go ahead. What's the real address? Yeah, I say politicians. Terrific.
West Chicago Avenue.
2247 West Chicago Avenue. Okay. Thank you very, very much. That's a wonderful invitation. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. That's terrific. Other comments or questions? Yes, ma'am. Work together. I mean, are you talking about folks of not European heritage? Well, I mean, for the campaign point of view, I come back to now that your state parties now can do this individual ethnic identification. And so what I would work with your other ethnic group Democratic leaders, both in the European and Mediterranean ethnic communities, but also in the Asian American community and the Latino community. Everyone has an interest in the same thing, in being able to communicate with people who addressing them as they see themselves. And so that's a way we can cooperate in every state in the country. And we're all here with the Ethnic Council to help you do that. Please. God bless you. Slava Ukraine. I think we're ready to take a picture. So how do you want it? Well, why don't we got a couple minutes. Let's run the ads right now, and then we'll do the picture.
Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And when one man is enslaved, all are not free.
American presidents, Republican and Democrat, have always defied Russia's communist dictators and defended American ideals. Kamala Harris gets this.
If we stand by while an aggressor invades its neighbor with impunity, they will keep going.
Kamala Harris will stand up to Putin, protect our allies, and keep us safe.
When Mongol warriors stormed Ukraine, Kyiv's church bells rang a night warning. They rang again when Ukrainians rallied for democracy. Today, they're warning the world of Putin's threat to freedom. Donald Trump embraces Putin.
I like Putin, he likes me.
He picked J.D. Vance.
I don't really care what happens to Ukraine.
Kamala Harris cares. She knows standing up to Putin keeps America safe. America's Future Majority Fund is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
Centuries ago, as invaders marched from the east, a Polish watchman blew his trumpet to warn his people. Today, freedom-loving Poles and Ukrainians are warning us of a new threat. Donald Trump encouraged Putin to attack our allies.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
But Kamala Harris has heard the trumpet call. She will defend our brave allies for their freedom and for ours. America's Future Majority Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising. Centuries ago.
Stay in touch. More to come. Photo time. So, go that way?